You step quietly into a world suspended between life and death, where every breath feels heavy with unseen threats. The ground beneath you trembles ever so slightly, a pulse echoing through the ancient forest. Somewhere nearby, a shadow slips through the underbrush, a saber-toothed tiger, muscles coiled like a spring, eyes fixed and unblinking. You don't just watch. You feel the raw power of this predator, its massive canines slicing the air like twin scythes, capable of ending a life with a single strike. Yet there is something more than sheer strength in its presence, a terrible elegance, a deadly precision honed over millennia. But as you freeze, heart hammering, a flicker of doubt crosses your mind. Is this raw force the only reason it ruled the land? Or is there a deeper secret, a hidden vulnerability beneath the fierce veneer? Your ancestors did not simply fall victim to this giant shadow. Somehow they survived. But how? You are not yet told. Instead, you sense the electric tension that filled the air when man met beast, a collision of worlds that would forever alter the course of life on Earth. The saber-tooth's roar is a warning, a challenge that shakes the very bones of the land. It is a reminder that in this world, the margin between hunter and hunted is razor thin. Every step you take is a gamble, every breath a negotiation with fate. This is not a story of brute force alone, but of sharp minds and desperate courage pushing against extinction's cold edge. You imagine yourself in that precarious balance, young, vulnerable, armed with little more than your wits and a fragile spear. The forest around you is both sanctuary and trap, filled with dangers that lurk just beyond sight. As the tiger prowls, stalking invisible paths, you begin to understand. This moment is more than survival. It is a crucible where instinct meets intelligence, where the slow-burning fire of human ingenuity begins to flicker. What strategies did your ancestors devise in the face of such terrifying power? How did they learn to outthink an enemy designed by evolution to be unstoppable? These questions hang in the air, unanswered but impossible to ignore. As the saber-toothed tiger moves with lethal grace, you feel the tension rise, a heartbeat stretched to breaking point. Its shadow falls across your path, yet you are not frozen in fear. Instead, your mind races, searching for a way out of the predator's deadly game. This is the edge of prehistory, where survival was not guaranteed but earned through every choice, every risk taken. And as the tiger's golden eyes gleam in the fading light, you realize that what you are witnessing is not just a hunt, but the opening chapter of a battle that will shape humanity itself. But the question lingers. If sheer power was the saber-tooth's greatest weapon, why did your fragile ancestors survive against all odds? What tools, what instincts, what flashes of insight allowed you to turn the tide? The answers are buried deep beneath layers of time, in the bones, the scars, and the whispered stories that time almost forgot. And as the forest darkens around you, the mystery of that survival unfolds, not with the roar of claws, but in the quiet spark of human cunning waiting to be discovered. The tiger circles, not knowing that it's being studied just as closely as it studies you, and that's where everything begins to shift. You begin to track its patterns, observe its hesitations, decode its movements like a language. You start to understand what it fears, what it avoids when it hesitates before striking. You are not the strongest, but you are becoming the most aware. This shift, this realization, is subtle at first, but it marks the beginning of something powerful, a new kind of intelligence, one not rooted in muscle or fang, but in memory, foresight, and shared knowledge. You're not alone. Around a fire, your kin whisper stories of attacks survived, of caves defended, of trails where the tiger never returns. Each tale is a fragment of a collective mind forming in real time. This is where strategy is born from fear, from trauma, from desperate need. Tools become extensions of your thoughts. Fire becomes more than warmth. It becomes perimeter and warning. Rocks are no longer just stones. They become missiles. Traps emerge from the forest floor like ideas sprung into physical form. And yet, even now, you never fully dominate the beast. There is no final victory, no extinction at your hands. Instead, a strange balance emerges. You learn to avoid its territories. You learn to read its moods in the wind. Your presence begins to shift the ecosystem itself, pushing the tiger to more distant fringes. But still, it waits, watching, adapting in turn. This is not a one-sided game. It is a cold, silent duel played over generations. Still, you carry the scars. You wake to the cry of someone missing. You bury those who didn't make it. The saber-tooth doesn't just live in the trees. It haunts your dreams, your rituals, your myths. It becomes a spirit, a warning, a teacher. You carve it on cave walls not to celebrate conquest, but to remember fear. It taught you how fragile you were and how powerful you could become. And this is where the myth begins. Not in triumph, but in transformation. You didn't just survive the saber-toothed tiger. You became something because of it. A species that could look terror in the eye and make a plan. A mind that could turn death into design. That tension, that feeling in your gut right now, is not gone. It's still in you. It lives in every shadow you check twice, every escape route you instinctively scan when entering a room. So what does it really mean to outsmart a creature like that? Is survival a single act, or the sum of thousands of choices across lifetimes? And if the roles were reversed, could you ever be as relentless, as singular in purpose, as the tiger that stalked you? If you were there, no armor, no tools, no books, just you, your instincts, and a monstrous cat breathing down your neck, would you run? Would you freeze? Or would you learn fast enough to change your fate? This isn't just prehistory. It's the beginning of your story. You stare into its eyes, amber, unblinking, ancient. There's no sound but the faint rustle of wind through tall grass, and then the snarl, low, bone deep. A sound that doesn't just scare you, it paralyzes you. This is no ordinary predator. The saber-toothed tiger, Smilodon, is a riddle wrapped in terror. Two curved fangs, up to 7 inches long, protrude like daggers from its upper jaw. At first glance, you think you're facing a perfect killing machine. But what you're about to realize is something far stranger. You crouch in the underbrush, not breathing, watching it prowl just beyond a fallen tree. Its shoulders ripple with power, the kind of muscle mass no modern predator carries. You feel the ground compress beneath its padded paws, silent as death. And yet it moves slowly, not with the lean, confident swagger of a cheetah or the restless glide of a wolf. There's a weight to it, an awkwardness. For the first time, doubt cracks through the fear. Is this animal really as invincible as it seems? The truth is, Smilodon was a creature of extremes. Evolution had sculpted it not for endurance, but for ambush. Unlike lions or wolves, it couldn't run down prey. Its frame was stocky, almost bear-like. You notice its short tail, a detail easily overlooked, but one that speaks volumes. This wasn't a long-distance tracker. It was built for close, brutal confrontations. That's when it hits you. This thing had to get close, dangerously close, and that gave you something to work with. The fangs themselves, so terrifying at first, now start to reveal their limitations. They were long, yes, but fragile, too fragile for bone. They weren't weapons for tearing or grinding. They were scalpels meant for soft targets, necks, throats, bellies. To use them, Smilodon had to pin its prey, immobilize it, and then deliver a single lethal thrust. A risky strategy. One misstep, one kick from a struggling target, and those fangs could shatter like glass. You begin to see it more clearly now, not just as a killer, but as a creature bound by trade-offs. It sacrificed agility for strength, speed for stealth, durability for precision. Everything about its body screamed specialization, and specialization is a double-edged sword. You move silently to higher ground and watch as the saber-tooth begins its slow, calculated stalk. It doesn't chase, it waits. It needs the element of surprise. Without it, it's vulnerable. That need gives you time, gives your ancestors a critical window, gives you an opening. And then there's the psychology. Imagine the moment right before it strikes. It's all in. No halfway attacks, no room for error. When it lunges, it commits its full weight and balance forward, exposing itself completely. If it misses, if it gets injured, if the prey resists harder than expected, it's over. It can't afford multiple attempts. The saber-tooth doesn't survive long, drawn-out fights. It gambles. And that perhaps was its greatest weakness. But evolution doesn't play favorites. It deals only in what works. And for thousands of years, this design worked spectacularly well. Smilodon ruled much of the Americas, walking forests and grasslands with few rivals. It brought down prey far larger than you, bison, giant ground sloths, even juvenile mammoths. But you're different. You think, you adapt, and you don't need claws to kill. You crouch again as it passes close, oblivious, and you start to notice something else. It's breathing, shallow, quick. It's powerful but not built for stamina. In this game, it either ends things quickly or risks exhaustion. You, on the other hand, have a secret weapon it can't match: endurance, persistence, the slow burn of a long memory, the ability to share tactics, to teach, to invent. But perhaps the most important detail isn't in the saber-tooth's body, it's in its world. The Ice Age landscape was brutal, full of towering predators and aggressive competitors. Smilodon wasn't the top of an empty pyramid. It was one of many kings in a violent court. Dire wolves, short-faced bears, and other apex beasts roamed nearby. Every kill was a risk. Every hunt could turn into a confrontation. And unlike you, Smilodon had no allies. You start to realize that intelligence didn't just help your ancestors fight. It helped them survive in a world where even the victors bled. You didn't have claws, but you had cooperation. You didn't have fangs, but you had foresight. The saber-tooth was never your opposite. It was your test. And in that realization, the myth begins to crack. This wasn't a supernatural monster. It was a living equation, one built for a very specific problem. But when the problem changed, when prey grew scarcer, when humans became more strategic, when fires ringed the savannas and spears darkened the sky, it began to fall behind. Slowly, tragically. But here's the paradox. Even in its downfall, it left something behind. A story, a symbol, a memory carved into your imagination as the ultimate predator. But now that image becomes more nuanced. You don't just fear it, you understand it. So next time you see those long fangs etched in stone or molded in museum glass, you'll know the truth. You'll know that this was never just a monster. It was a creature pushed to the evolutionary edge, a masterpiece of purpose, and a prisoner of its own perfection. And when the day came that you and it met on equal ground, you didn't win because you were stronger. You won because you could see its weaknesses and your own. Would you have seen the fragility beneath the terror, or just the teeth? Because that difference, the ability to observe, analyze, adapt, is the first step toward dominance, and the saber-tooth in all its glory helped draw that map. You wake to the sound of wind scraping against stone. Cold seeps into your bones through the packed dirt beneath you. There's no bed, no blanket, just firelight flickering on cave walls and the steady, rhythmic breath of your sleeping kin. You're not alone, but you're not safe either. Every sound outside could mean death. You're not a predator, not yet. You're prey that hasn't learned to run fast enough or to fight well enough. And yet, you're still here. Your body is light, too light. No thick fur, no claws, no great strength in your limbs. If you were to square off with any Ice Age predator, Smilodon, dire wolf, cave bear, you'd lose. Instantly. Your only defense, stay together, stay alert, stay one step ahead. You press your hand against the wall and feel the uneven texture of ancient rock, cool, solid, protective. You're not the strongest animal out here, but you are one of the most aware. Already, your ancestors have learned something the saber-tooth never did, the power of memory. When danger comes, you don't just react, you remember. That sound in the grass 2 nights ago, the strange bend in the tree line, the broken tracks in the mud, they all meant something. And that something passed from one voice to another. You don't just survive on instincts, you survive on stories. You rise before the sun and the work begins. You gather sticks, dig for roots, check the traps laid near the river. Your tools are basic, stones chipped into sharpness, bones honed into points, but they are yours, extensions of your will. Where your body fails, your mind compensates. You can reshape the world, bend wood into spears, use stone to break bone, use fire to make darkness livable. You don't fight nature, you manipulate it. But none of this would matter if you were alone. The others matter more than anything. The group, the tribe, the collective memory held between elders and children. You're never really thinking alone. One hand cuts meat while another guards the fire. One eye watches the forest while another teaches a child how to walk quietly. You didn't invent survival, you inherited it. From those who endured long enough to pass it down. That in itself is power. And when fear strikes, when something growls from the tall grass, you don't scatter. You form a wall of bodies, of wills, of resolve. You raise your spears, not because you're stronger than the beast, but because you're many. That was your ancestors' genius. Not dominance, not courage, but unity. You win with others. But that unity wasn't easy. You feel the tensions at the edge of every gathering, the arguments over food, the silent glances of suspicion, jealousy, grief, love. You are not a hive. You're individuals bound by choice and necessity. What kept you alive wasn't a perfect harmony. It was the ability to navigate conflict without breaking apart. You didn't have to be flawless. You just had to stay together. Even language, this strange, invisible thread, is beginning to evolve in you. Not full words yet, but grunts with meaning, gestures with memory, sounds that point to things not here, things imagined, feared, or remembered. This is more than communication. This is coordination. You're building a shared mind, layer by layer. Still, the days are hard. You walk miles in search of water. Your hands are calloused from cutting meat, shaping tools, weaving fibers. Your back aches. Your feet bleed. Every calorie matters. Every mistake could be fatal. And yet you laugh, you teach. You protect the weak. You bury your dead. There is a tenderness in your tribe that no predator can touch. That tenderness is also a kind of weapon. Because where the saber-tooth kills to survive, you create bonds. Bonds that endure past injury, past weakness. If you break your leg, they don't leave you behind. They carry you, feed you, heal you. In doing so, they gain something no muscle can provide: trust. And with trust comes time. Time to learn, time to improve, time to build. One day you will plant seeds, shape fire, carve symbols into stone, but that hasn't happened yet. Right now, you're just surviving, just learning how to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. And that might be your greatest weapon of all. Because when you look at the saber-tooth, you don't just see fangs, you see risk, you see weakness, you see a pattern waiting to be broken, you see a way to win. And so, slowly, without ever meaning to, your kind begins to shift the balance. You stop reacting and start anticipating. You stop running and start laying traps. You stop fearing the dark and start bringing fire to it. Your bones are still fragile, your body still weak, but inside your skull, a fire is growing brighter. Every story shared around the fire, every scar shown with pride, every lesson taught to a child, it builds, and it lasts. You don't need to be stronger than your enemies. You just need to remember longer, think deeper, and act together. Because long after the saber-tooth disappears from the earth, your story will still be unfolding. Not because you conquered the wild with power, but because you survived it with something far more dangerous. A hope, a connection, and the audacity to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. You open your eyes to a world half frozen, half alive. The wind doesn't whisper, it screams. It tears across endless tundras, sculpting the earth with ice and time. The sky is a cold, pale bruise above you. Snow doesn't just fall, it commands. And beneath that snow lies a secret war, one older than you, older than memory. The fight for survival in the unforgiving theater of the Pleistocene. This is no ordinary wilderness. This is an ecosystem born in extremes. Gigantic glaciers carve valleys and raise mountains. Forests retreat beneath advancing cold. Grasslands stretch far beyond the horizon, turning into frozen deserts in the blink of an era. And in this shifting, ruthless world, every creature is a gamble nature took, a compromise between strength, speed, and resilience, including you. You don't rule this land, you barely endure it. The soil is stingy and prey is scarce. You follow the herds, reindeer, mammoths, aurochs, not by choice but by necessity. They are your lifeline, and theirs is a journey carved into instinct, chasing the slimmest margins of warmth and food. Every step you take is dictated by forces you don't yet understand: climate, season, scarcity. But still you move. You adapt, because the land will not. To the east, the sky glows with the promise of morning. But it's never warmth that follows, only more choices. Cross the ice or hug the cliffs. Wait for prey to come to the valley or risk the deep woods where saber-tooths prowl. Out here, the wrong answer doesn't mean discomfort. It means extinction. You begin to see the landscape not as scenery, but as an opponent. Every frozen stream is a potential trap, every cave a possible den, every patch of trees a hiding place, sometimes for you, sometimes for something watching you. You don't move freely through the world. You calculate every path, because the world is watching back. Even the air seems heavier here. Each breath feels like a negotiation. Cold seeps into your ribs, threatens to still your blood, slow your mind. Your firewood runs out faster than you can replace it. If the wind shifts the wrong way, your scent trails behind you like a death sentence. The world doesn't care if you're clever. It only cares if you last. But there's a strange beauty, too. The mammoth herds shake the earth as they pass. Giant sloths move like slow dreams through the brush. Woolly rhinos thunder through frost-coated hills. This isn't just survival. It's theater on a scale you've never imagined. And you are a fragile actor in a play that never stops, never waits, never forgives. Even your enemies are shaped by this place. The saber-toothed cat wasn't built for agility. It was built for ambush. Its massive fangs too delicate for brawls, its body too bulky for long chases. It thrives only in environments where cover exists, where the terrain lets it vanish into shadow and strike like lightning. That's why it stays close to the forest's edge, near broken ground, close to riverbanks. The same places you often seek for water or shelter or a kill of your own. So the world forces you into the same spaces, not by chance, by design. The land doesn't just shape your movements, it engineers your encounters. When you stumble upon saber-toothed tracks, you don't just see a predator. You see proof that this world is still testing you, that you're both products of its design, drawn into conflict not by hatred, but by hunger, and by how little room there is to live. Because the land doesn't allow luxury, no creature gets to be wasteful. Even death must serve a purpose. When an animal falls, it becomes a feast, not just for you, but for scavengers, insects, even the land itself. Nothing is forgotten here. Nothing goes unused. And that brutal efficiency makes you wonder, are you any different? When you kill, it's not just for food. It's for tools, for warmth, for trade. A single mammoth could feed your entire group for weeks, its bones used for shelter, its tendons for thread, its fat for fire. But to get one, you must work as a coordinated machine. You must know the terrain better than the mammoth does. Set traps, predict paths, exploit the cold, the slope, the snow. You don't just hunt animals, you hunt the land. Even your rituals, the way you bury the dead, mark stones, shape totems, they arise from this interaction. A constant negotiation with a land that takes more than it gives. You leave carvings behind not to decorate, but to remember, to warn, to hope someone else sees and learns faster than you did. Because time, too, is a predator here. Glaciers don't just shape mountains, they erase histories. One shift in climate and your sacred hunting ground disappears beneath a mile of ice. Your migration path dries up. A water source becomes poison. You're not just surviving predators and hunger. You're surviving an earth in flux, a world where nothing stays stable long enough to be called home. But in that instability lies possibility. Because every collapse opens a door. Every retreating glacier reveals new land, new animals, new chances. You don't just flee the cold, you follow opportunity. You read the changing sky like scripture. You learn to anticipate the land's mood. And unlike the saber-tooth, you don't overspecialize. You remain fluid, curious, adaptable. And that adaptability gives you something the Ice Age rarely offers: choice. You can move where others cannot. Switch tools, alter diets, shift strategies. You don't need to dominate the world. You only need to keep pace with its change. And slowly, without fanfare, you begin to. In a land where everything else is a prisoner of instinct and design, you are something terrifyingly new. You are flexible. And the land doesn't quite know what to do with that. So as you walk across this ancient tundra, beneath a sky that never warms, you understand something your ancestors felt in their bones. The world doesn't belong to you. It never did. But for the first time, you might belong to it. And that, in this harsh, beautiful, merciless place, is the beginning of everything. You freeze, not because of the cold this time, but because something is wrong, too quiet, too still. The wind pauses like it's holding its breath, and every hair on your skin rises in silent warning. You don't see it, not yet, but you feel it. A presence that doesn't belong to the trees or the snow, something ancient, patient, watching. There's danger in the silence, and you've learned to trust that silence. Because the saber-tooth doesn't roar before it strikes, it doesn't give you a warning. It doesn't need to. It doesn't chase you across the plains like a lion might. It doesn't sprint from a distance like a wolf. It waits. It blends. It becomes part of the terrain until it's too late for you to do anything but die. You can't help but see it now, the way it hunts, not with speed but with precision. The low crawl through tall grass, the breath held beneath the wind, the eyes locked not on the strongest but on the slowest, the youngest, the wounded, the distracted. Its world is made of choices, and everyone is lethal. It moves with terrifying efficiency, staying downwind, reading the herd, predicting panic. And then, in one perfect, explosive burst, it's over. The leap is unlike anything else in nature. No subtle stalkers pounce. It launches itself with all the weight of its muscular frame. Hundreds of pounds propelled by legs built not for distance, but for devastation. It crashes into its target like a boulder falling off a cliff. Then come the fangs. Those famous curved blades, longer than your fingers, sink not into muscle but into soft tissue. The neck, the belly, vital arteries. The saber-tooth doesn't drag its kill out. It ends it instantly. It must. Because those teeth, for all their terror, are fragile. One wrong strike, one awkward twist, and they could shatter. They're not tools for wrestling. They're scalpels for precise execution. And that is their weakness. You begin to notice the cost of the saber-tooth's perfection. Its power is front-loaded. All ambush, no endurance. If the strike fails, the cat is exposed. If the prey fights back or worse, flees into open terrain, the saber-tooth is at a disadvantage. It's not built to chase, not built to brawl, it's built for a single shot. Miss and it pays the price. You've seen it happen, the sabers that miscalculate, the young ones that lunge too soon or too late, a hoof to the chest, a horn to the side. They don't get second chances. In this world, even the top predator can fall victim to one mistake. And this is where your opportunity begins. You don't need to be stronger. You don't need claws or fangs. You need to survive the first second, that's it. If you can spot the pattern, see the brush shift just before it pounces, if you can react just fast enough to dodge, to throw something, to climb a tree, or to scream and scatter the herd, you live. And it doesn't. Because when the ambush fails, it becomes your moment to strike. You've seen the marks on ancient bones, saber-toothed ribs pierced by spears, humerus bones shattered by blunt force. These aren't kills of chance. They're proof of strategy, of timing, of human retaliation, the hunted turning into the hunters. And so you begin to study your enemy. You watch how it selects its victims, how it never hunts alone, how it uses the landscape, fallen logs, ditches, riverbeds to mask its approach. You learn its schedule. Sabers prefer dawn and dusk, the in-between hours when shadows stretch and vision falters. You avoid low ground during those times. You don't camp near water holes, not without someone on watch. You begin to anticipate the cat's mind, not because you're faster, but because you're watching it as it watches you. But there's another problem. Sabers don't always kill for hunger. Sometimes they kill for dominance, territory, competition. You've seen carcasses untouched, left behind not for meat but as a message, a warning. And if that saber sees you as a rival for prey or space, it will come for you. So your defenses must evolve too. You move in groups, not alone. You carry fire not just for warmth but to repel eyes in the dark. You make noise deliberately. Rattles, whistles, clicks. A language made not just to speak, but to alert. To warn others that a shadow is moving through the forest. Still, nothing prepares you for the moment it chooses you. You're walking through brush when it happens, a flicker of movement barely seen. Your gut drops before your brain can speak. You don't think, you dive. Behind you, something crashes. Dirt flies, claws rake air. You scramble, heart thundering. The saber missed, but only just. Now you hear it, the growl behind the silence, the snarl of a predator denied. It doesn't run, it circles. You grab a branch, a stone, you shout, you throw, you make yourself loud, big, defiant. The saber pauses. One misstep could still break its fangs. You are not prey cowering, you are prey resisting. And in that hesitation, it leaves. Not because you won, but because it couldn't afford to lose. That moment rewires you. You stop thinking of the saber-tooth as a monster and start seeing it as a creature with limits. Yes, it is powerful. Yes, it is deadly. But it's also vulnerable, dependent on stealth, on fear, on the element of surprise. Strip those away and you are not defenseless. You are dangerous. You begin to train for this. You practice drills, set traps, design weapons that don't just kill but protect, spears long enough to keep the cat at bay, clubs dense enough to break bone, fires hot enough to keep them distant at night. What once ruled you in terror is now part of your strategy. And that shift, it's not just physical, it's mental, emotional. For the first time, you feel what the saber-tooth once made you forget: agency. You're not waiting to die anymore. You're starting to plan to live. You were never supposed to survive, not in a world like this, not with soft skin, dull teeth, and no claws. Not when the saber-tooth prowled the grasslands like a shadow made of muscle and fang. The odds weren't just stacked against you, they were crushing. But something strange began to happen. You didn't grow stronger. You didn't evolve thicker hides or sharper instincts. Instead, something far more dangerous stirred behind your eyes. You started to think ahead. And in this world, that changes everything. It begins with small acts: a sharpened stick, a piece of stone chipped just right. You notice how a curved edge cuts deeper than a flat one, how heat hardens wood, how wounds heal faster with certain leaves packed tight. No single act is revolutionary, but each one adds a brick to the invisible fortress your mind is building. A new kind of survival, not based on speed or size, but foresight. You start remembering, not just what happened, but how it happened, and why. Memory becomes your first tool. Pattern recognition follows. You begin to notice that prey gather near water in the mornings, that certain birds fly off moments before a predator arrives, that the moonlight reflects differently on fur than on stone. You're not just reacting anymore. You're anticipating. You're predicting. And that is the saber-tooth's worst nightmare. Because your enemy is locked inside its body, it does what it has always done. It hunts the same way, kills the same way, stalks the same way. But you're evolving even as you run. You can fail today and learn by sunrise. The cat cannot. Now you're thinking in sequences. You're imagining, asking, what if? You see a large cat bring down a mammoth calf. You think, could I lead it there on purpose next time? This moment, this hypothetical, is something no predator on Earth is capable of. You aren't just surviving anymore. You're playing a different game entirely. And then you begin to teach. You don't just act alone. You share what works. Around the fire, you show your child how to carve flint. You warn your brother about the scent trails sabers leave when hunting. You mimic the growl of a cat so your tribe learns to recognize it, even in the dark. You've created a second brain, a collective one, a distributed network of minds storing, processing, and improving information. Every campfire is a hard drive, every elder a library. And this changes everything. Because now, you're not just one fragile body trying to outlast extinction. You're a civilization in its first breath. And the saber-tooth, it doesn't know what it's up against yet. You build traps, simple at first, pits lined with sharpened stakes. You realize that if you can guide an animal's panic, its power becomes your tool. You dig near migration paths. You cover the hole with leaves. You wait. And for the first time, you kill not in fear, but in confidence. The world tilts. Strategy becomes instinct. You send scouts ahead while others forage. You develop signals, clicks, whistles, grunts, sounds that carry across trees without echo. Language begins not in poetry, but in survival. One day, you find the bones. A fallen saber-tooth. Rib cage shattered, but not from trampling and not from age. You see the spear tips buried deep inside. A coordinated attack, multiple angles, a planned kill. You're looking at a moment in time when intelligence overcame instinct, where coordination defeated brute force. And it wasn't a one-time event. It became a pattern. More sites appear across the continent. Kill zones, butchered remains, human tools beside predator skeletons. You begin to realize the truth. You weren't just lucky. You were rewriting the food chain. You are. There's a moment when you stand at the edge of a valley scanning the horizon. You no longer fear every movement in the brush. You no longer jump at shadows. Instead, you see the terrain like a game board. Elevation, wind direction, visibility, cover, everything becomes data. Everything has a purpose. And somewhere deep in your consciousness, you realize this isn't just about survival anymore. It's about dominance. The saber-tooth still has its fangs, but you have something sharper: imagination. You can build what does not yet exist. You can plan for threats you've never seen. You can prepare. One day, a child in your tribe picks up a rock. They don't need it for defense. They don't even feel fear. They carve a symbol, a line, a curve, a mark that means something. They've seen their elders organize hunts with gestures. Now they want to remember something without being present. That symbol is more dangerous than any fang. It's the beginning of external memory, of recorded thought, of communication unbound by time. You, once prey, are becoming the apex species, not because of what you are, but because of what you can imagine becoming. It doesn't happen overnight. There are still deaths, still losses, still moments when the saber-tooth reminds you that it's not gone yet. But now, every failure feeds the collective mind, and every success, it echoes across generations. The Ice Age world is still cruel, still vast, still full of teeth. But now you move through it differently, head up, eyes sharp, not just looking for danger but for advantage, opportunity, pattern, weakness. Because you've learned the most important truth of all. Muscle tires, claws dull, fangs break. But the brain learns, and it never forgets. You're crouched near a stream, your fingers wrapped around a rock. It's not special, not yet. Just a chunk of flint shaped by time and water. But your grip tightens, not out of instinct, out of intention. You don't even know it yet, but something ancient and irreversible is about to begin. You strike it. Once, twice. The sound cracks through the morning chill, flint against flint, stone against silence. A shard breaks loose, sharp, jagged, and in that moment the world changes. Because now you are armed. It doesn't look like much, a crude edge, a chipped surface, but this isn't just a tool, it's your first weapon, and that changes everything. You are no longer meat waiting for teeth. You are no longer the chased. You can stand your ground now, not because your body is stronger, but because your mind just gave it an edge. Literally. You test it against bark, against hide, against bone. It cuts, not deep, not clean, but enough to wound, to bleed, to give you time. That tiny advantage, seconds, inches, that's all you need. Because the saber-tooth lives on precision. One miss, one hesitation, and the hunter becomes the hunted. So you learn to strike first. Soon, your entire group begins to shape stones the same way. You trade techniques, mimic gestures, share flints by the fire. A single mind becomes many. A single edge becomes hundreds. You are building an arsenal from the earth itself. And every tool is a story. Every scar on stone a signature of survival. But you don't stop at cutting. You begin to pierce. One day you tie a sharpened bone to a branch, lash it with sinew, harden the point in fire. You test it on a carcass. It sinks deep, deeper than the claws you never had. Now you don't have to wait for the predator to find you. You can meet it in the wild. You can strike from a distance. You can defend others. You have reach. You have power. And the saber-tooth, for all its terror, cannot adapt as fast as you can invent. You watch it now through new eyes, not just as prey, but as a problem to be solved. You notice its blind spots, how it leaps from a single direction, how its balance shifts when it pounces, how its neck remains exposed midair. You begin to plan for that moment. You ready your spear not just to survive, but to counter. This is no longer just survival. This is strategy. The saber-tooth sees you as it always did, slow, soft, exposed. But you are holding something it has never seen before. And that's its mistake. One day the cat charges, hungry, reckless, certain of its dominance. But this time you're not alone. You've circled it, lured it in. You strike from the side while another hits its flank. It howls. The air shakes. It tries to flee, but it's too late. A final spear finds the gap beneath its shoulder. It crashes. Your hands shake. Your chest burns, but the cat doesn't rise. You don't cheer, you don't celebrate, you approach with reverence. The creature was beautiful, deadly, sacred, but its time is ending, not because it grew weaker, but because you grew smarter. That hunt is passed down for generations, and the weapons, they evolve. Flint becomes obsidian, obsidian becomes bone. Bone becomes antler. You experiment, you fail, you try again. And with every version, your weapons grow deadlier, more elegant, more precise. Spears become throwing sticks. Throwing sticks become atlatls. Each invention extends your reach. Each design buys you distance from death. You are no longer just fighting for yourself. You are engineering your safety. And the saber-tooth begins to retreat, not from a single weapon, but from the growing web of intelligence surrounding you. Every new tool is a barrier. Every new idea, a warning to the wild that your kind is no longer an easy kill. You can see it in their bones. The fossil record shifts. Saber-tooth injuries become more frequent, spears lodged in ribs, fractures in jaws, healed wounds from failed hunts. They're losing, slowly, tragically. The world that once belonged to instinct now bends toward invention. And it all started with a broken stone by the water. The spark of creation is addictive. Soon, tools go beyond war. You shape scrapers for hides, grinders for seeds, hooks for fish. You carve grooves in wood to make handles. You stitch using awls and needles. Your world is becoming mechanical, one invention at a time. But it all ties back to one thing: survival. You didn't create tools for convenience. You created them because something with saber teeth chased you across the plains, and your bare hands weren't enough. So you adapted. And adaptation is victory. The cat may have ruled the Ice Age wilds for 1,000,000 years, but your weapons tell a different story. One where vulnerability became design, where fear became fuel, where every chipped edge, every carved shaft whispered the same quiet revolution. You don't need to be faster. You just need to be smarter. And that whisper is spreading across tribes, across valleys, across entire continents. One spark becomes many. One tool becomes tradition. A new force walks the earth, not the strongest, not the fiercest, but the most unpredictable. You. And if the saber-tooth knew what was coming next, it would have run. You don't remember when the first spark happened, whether it was lightning striking dry grass or the ember left behind after a volcanic breath. But you do remember the heat, the roar, the way everything else fled from it, even you. At first, fire is chaos. It devours, it hisses. It threatens to consume everything you know. You watch it from a distance, heart pounding as it dances in unpredictable waves across the plains. You fear it, rightfully so. It cannot be reasoned with. It takes without mercy. But one night, after the storm, something shifts. A tree smolders. A single branch glows. The others stay back, wary, but you step forward, carefully, cautiously. You kneel, extending a stick. And when it catches, when it glows orange, like the eyes of a predator in the dark, you don't run. You carry it home. It begins there. Fire, tamed not with strength but with trust. It flickers beside you as you sleep. It crackles low as you pass around meat. It hums warmth through the cold that once stole your breath. For the first time, the night does not belong to beasts. It belongs to you. And that changes everything. Because this is more than warmth. This is dominion over time. The day no longer ends when the sun falls. You sit in circles now. You speak longer. Stories stretch past dusk. Plans form under stars. Fire becomes the beating heart of your people, a rhythm pulsing through every gathering. But its true power lies in what it repels. You don't see saber-tooths anymore near your fires. They linger at the edge, hidden in brush, eyes glowing, but they do not charge. They remember the heat, the brightness, the way flames bite back. Fire is not just comfort, it is deterrent. It carves a boundary between you and the wild. Predators trust darkness. You now command light. You begin to build fires deliberately, not just to cook, but to guard. Circles of flame surround sleeping grounds. Torch lines mark paths in the forest. Even the most ferocious creatures hesitate. Their instincts scream retreat. For the first time in history, your kind walks boldly after dusk. You notice something else too. Animals flee from smoke. Your hunters learn to herd prey toward cliffs using smoldering sticks. You drive mammoths into traps. You flush smaller game from thickets. The saber-tooth may have claws, but you have combustion, and you've only just begun. Soon you learn to preserve fire, to carry embers in stone bowls, to relight sparks with dried fungus and flint. The fear of the dark, once a permanent drumbeat, now fades into background noise. You are no longer at the mercy of the elements. You have brought the sun down to earth and held it in your hands. But fire is not just survival, it is evolution. You cook meat, The fibers soften, the nutrients unlock. You no longer need to spend hours chewing raw sinew. Your jaw changes, your gut shifts. Your brain grows fed by richer calories, freed by simpler digestion. Around the flames, your species begins to transform, one bite at a time. And with each meal, trust grows. The fire becomes your center, not just of heat, but of culture. Here, you trade ideas. You teach the young. You pass on myths. Even grief finds a place here as you burn the dead and watch sparks carry their memory skyward. Flames become sacred, symbols of both ending and beginning. But the saber-tooth does not understand this. It still prowls, still waits, but it senses the shift. Where once you scattered at its roar, now you stand, torches raised, eyes steady. You have changed the rules. No longer an animal of instinct, you are something else entirely. A strategist, a builder, a firekeeper. Your camp spread. The wild narrows. And though the saber-tooth still has the edge in claw and fang, it cannot cross the firelight. That invisible wall, that burning threshold, separates its world from yours. It doesn't know it yet, but it is already extinct. You build fire not just to survive the night, but to send a message, a signal across time, that here humans lived, humans endured, humans altered the natural order with nothing but friction and patience. What began as a spark in the forest becomes a blaze in your soul. You carry that legacy even now. Every candle, every match, every hearth is a whisper of that first night. When you didn't run, when you reached toward the unknown, when you tamed the oldest power Earth had to offer. You did not inherit fire. You earned it. And through it, you began to shape the world. The saber-tooth had strength, but you had flame. You are alone, and you feel it in your bones. Every rustle in the grass becomes a threat, every shadow a set of fangs. You can hear your heartbeat in your ears, loud and useless. You have no claws, no thick hide, no blazing speed. Just two legs, bare skin, and a stone that feels too small in your shaking hand. And yet, you are not alone for long. They return, one by one, silent, alert, your people, your tribe, each with the same weakness carved into their bodies, and yet each bringing something else, a lookout's sharp eyes, a healer's steady hands, a child's laughter that somehow reminds you why you fight to live at all. This is your secret. The saber-tooth hunts alone, but you were never meant to. Your strength isn't in your limbs. It's in the invisible thread that ties you to the others. You eat together, move together, bleed together. And when the predator circles in the dark, it doesn't face one terrified prey, it faces many. You learn to watch each other's backs. One scans the ridgeline while the other forages. One tracks footprints while another listens for the low growl in the wind. You begin to specialize without needing the word. Roles take shape like stones in a river, smooth, silent, essential. And when it comes to the hunt, everything changes. One of you flushes the prey. Another waits downwind with a trap. A third circles wide to drive the beast inward. No single one of you could manage it alone. But together, the wild starts bending. Even the larger game, once untouchable, begins to fall. You celebrate not the biggest hunter, but the coordination, the dance. The saber-tooth doesn't understand this. Its world is built on instinct, on solo action. It doesn't strategize, it doesn't share. Its kill is its own, but so is its failure. When the hunt goes wrong, when the prey fights back, it limps away alone, wounded, vulnerable, forgotten. But not you. If one of you stumbles, the others lift them. If one is injured, the group waits, slows down, shares warmth, feeds them. No other species on Earth does this with such commitment. This is not just survival. This is identity. You begin to speak, not in full sentences, not yet, but in sound, gesture, pattern. Grunts that signal danger, hums that signal calm, a raised hand that stops a movement. You invent meaning, shared codes, and with each symbol, each nod, you collapse the distance between your minds. Now your thoughts aren't just yours, they spread. They echo. Ideas pass from one to another, how to shape a spear, how to find water, how to mimic the call of a bird to lure prey. Each discovery doesn't die with its thinker. It survives, grows, evolves. You become a species not just of memory, but of shared memory. And in the firelight, something else happens. You begin to imagine. You tell stories. You act out hunts, warn of dangers, retell victories. And in these retellings, knowledge crystallizes. A child who hasn't yet hunted knows how to face a saber before they ever see one, because someone spoke it into the fire, made it real. No other creature prepares for a future it cannot see, but you do. And that's what scares the predators. Because alone you are food, but together you are the storm. You are the edge of something bigger. You are not just surviving, you are planning. You are rehearsing. You are becoming. When the saber-tooth stalks a camp now, it sees not confusion but formation. Torches lit, stones ready, spears poised, not scattered bodies but a wall of eyes watching it back. And one day, the saber doesn't charge. It turns. Because the cost is too high now, the threat too coordinated. There are easier kills elsewhere in creatures that haven't yet learned to circle around a fire, to build walls not from wood but from will. Your community becomes your shield. Not armor, something better, flexibility, coverage, trust. Even your children are protected by this force. Long before they can fend for themselves, they are carried, fed, sung to. No other animal spends so much time raising its young, but you do, because every child is a future hunter, healer, fire keeper. And somewhere deep in that child's eyes is the next invention, the next tool, the next language. You don't realize it yet, but this is how you will conquer time. Your knowledge will pass through generations not in instinct but in instruction, not written but remembered, retold, reinforced in ritual, in caution, in firelit fables. And because you survive together, you will also evolve together. The saber-tooth never saw it coming. It ruled with terror, but terror doesn't scale. Terror does replicate. Terror doesn't nurture. You do. You scale. You replicate. You nurture. And one day, long after the last saber-tooth has fallen silent, your people will still be walking across continents, over oceans, into space, carrying the legacy of the first time you realized that alone, you were prey. But together, you were power. So the next time someone asks you what made humans different, don't say intelligence. Say each other. You crouch behind the tree line, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the clearing ahead. The air is thick with silence, not peace silence, the kind that crackles just before chaos erupts. Your fingers grip a long wooden shaft, its tip darkened in fire and hardened to a lethal point. It's not perfect. It splinters near the base. It wobbles slightly when thrown. But right now, it's the only thing between you and death. Across the clearing, the saber-toothed stalks. It moves like a ghost, low, deliberate, muscles taut beneath fur. It doesn't know you're here. Not yet, but it senses something. Its ears twitch. Its eyes scan the brush. You feel its hunger heavy in the air. This is not just a hunt. It's a standoff between two very different kinds of power. The saber has speed, stealth, strength. Its jaw can crush bone, its fangs can puncture a mammoth's hide, and when it strikes, it doesn't hesitate. But you have something new. You have the plan. Behind you, hidden in the tall grass, another hunter waits with a second spear. Farther back, someone sharpens stones into blades. On the opposite ridge, your tribe's fastest runner has already circled wide, ready to drive the cat into the trap you've dug, a pit, lined with sharpened stakes, camouflaged by branches and time. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when you only ran, when your kind scattered at the first growl, when the only tactic was to survive one more night. But something changed, not in your body, but in your mind. You began to think like a predator. The first spears were clumsy, just sticks hardened in fire. But they were the beginning of precision, a way to strike from a distance, to turn prey into a threat. You learned to throw from behind cover, to aim for the soft parts under the belly, the neck, the eye. The saber still had the upper hand in speed, in instinct, but it didn't understand this new game. It didn't understand fear. You could see it now in the way they hesitated, in the moments after a thrown spear missed but thudded into the ground with force. They flinched, they retreated, they learned wariness, and in the wild, hesitation is weakness. You exploit that. In time, you learn to control space. Spears allow you to hold a perimeter to deny approach. You learn to bait the saber, to lure it into false confidence, then strike when it overcommits. You're not stronger than it. You're just faster in thought, and that changes everything. But the spear alone wasn't enough. So you built traps, not crude holes, complex snares designed with patience and foresight. You dig pits. You study terrain. You study the saber's patterns, where it rests, where it hunts, how it moves when injured. You become obsessed with its behavior, not out of fear, but calculation. You begin setting ambushes. One of your kind cries out in a clearing, exposed, vulnerable. The saber lunges, but behind the fallen log, two others rise, spears raised. One throws, the other charges, and before the predator understands it has been outplayed, it's already bleeding. But it was never without cost. Every tactic carried risk. Every time you stepped into open ground to bait the saber, you gambled with your life. One misstep, one thrown spear that snapped mid-flight, One hunter who slipped in the mud while circling wide. That's all it took for the plan to become a massacre. And yet you kept doing it. Because every successful hunt fed the tribe for days. Every fallen saber meant fewer ambushes at night. And every time you stood your ground and won, the myth of predator supremacy cracked a little more. And here's the part you didn't expect. You started to feel pity. When a saber lay trapped, legs shattered, snarling in agony, you didn't just see a monster. You saw desperation, hunger, an animal that, like you, was just trying to survive. The line between hunter and hunted began to blur, not just in practice, but in identity. And that made you smarter. You didn't fight from rage. You fought from necessity. You studied them not to hate them, but to win. And in doing so, you became more than just prey with weapons. You became tacticians, students of behavior. You understood your enemy more intimately than it understood itself. Eventually, you hunted not just for survival, but for dominance. The balance shifted. Now, saber-tooths were more likely to flee than to fight. The open plains became human territory. Campfires burned where once their dens lay hidden. You drove them back not with muscle but with patterns, with preparation, with memory. You passed the tactics down. You showed the next generation where to stab, where to bait, where to dig. You reenacted the hunts around the fire. You mimicked the saber's pounce with your children so they would recognize it by instinct. They would never face that fear unprepared. And they never forgot. Your world became one of symbols. A claw etched into rock marked danger. A series of sticks arranged just so indicated a nearby pit trap. You left messages for those you hadn't even met yet. The battlefield grew larger than any one encounter. Because this was no longer about killing a single predator. It was about winning the war of survival. The spear didn't just pierce fur and flesh. It pierced time. It created legacy. It taught you to trust the idea that something made could be mightier than something born. The saber-tooth never adapted. You did. That was the real difference. Because the spear was not the end. It was only the beginning of tools that would bend the world to your needs, of weapons that would extend your reach across continents, of strategies that would eventually push even the deadliest predators into legend. And as you step over the fallen saber now, breath heavy, arms aching, you don't feel triumph. You feel awe. Because what you just faced was the last of its kind. Its species won battles for thousands of years, but it never learned to share ideas, never learned to set traps, never learned to think in we. You did. And that's why your people will live to tell the tale. So when they ask how you defeated the apex predator of the Ice Age, don't say with strength. Say with story, with spear, and with strategy. You run your hand across a piece of bone, smooth in some places, jagged in others. It looks ancient, feels ancient, but it breathes with silent violence. There's a groove near the femur, not made by erosion or time, but something far sharper and more deliberate. You're not looking at a fossil, you're listening to a story. Because this isn't just a bone, it's a battlefield, and it remembers everything. You wouldn't know it at first glance. It's buried beneath layers of sediment lost in the clutter of time. But when you look closer, when you truly see, you find something chilling. A puncture wound deep and clean, the width of a saber's fang. But just beside it, new bone has grown, scar tissue, healing, survival. This was no skeleton picked clean after a helpless kill. This was a creature that fought, that bled, that lived. And then you see another. A human rib fractured, splintered, but fused again. The break wasn't what killed them. They endured it, carried it, adapted around it. In this quiet record of pain is proof. The humans didn't just flee sabers. Sometimes they stood their ground. The fossil record doesn't lie. There are no opinions here, no myths, only injuries, only patterns. You see clusters of bones with trauma, blunt force, crushing bites, but also clean slashes that show blade contact. You see saber remains with spearpoint damage embedded in their pelvis. You see skulls caved in by stone. You see a dance of violence written in calcium and sediment across thousands of years. And in that dance, something shifts. Because the sabers bear scars too. Some fossils show signs of limping, asymmetric limbs worn from compensating for an injury. A shattered jawbone, fused badly, shows a saber that likely couldn't bite cleanly again. One had half its tail missing, a wound that wouldn't kill it but would rob it of balance. They weren't invincible. The evidence isn't just about death. It's about the aftermath, about recovery, about the very idea that a human could survive a saber-tooth encounter and that a saber-tooth could survive a human counterattack. These weren't one-sided massacres. They were hard-fought, brutal exchanges. And every scar tells you what weapons alone cannot. That early humans weren't passive observers in their world. They weren't waiting to be eaten. They were participants in an arms race of flesh, will, and wits. But there's another pattern, one far more haunting. You begin to notice how the injuries change over time. In earlier layers, saber bones are dominant, spread wide, frequent, unchallenged. Their skeletons are near pristine, their remains often clustered near the bones of prey animals, including your ancestors. But as you move forward in time, something flips. Sabers appear less frequently. When they do, their injuries are more violent, more complex. The wounds show clear patterns of human interaction, blunt trauma, precise punctures, dislocations from traps. Meanwhile, human remains begin to show fewer lethal wounds, more survived encounters, more died from old age or each other. That's not coincidence. That's evolution in motion. And then near the surface, something goes quiet. The saber bones stop. No new scars, no fresh remains, just echoes. They vanished. Not in a flash, not in one great battle, but in a slow erosion of advantage. A decline written in every healed rib, every lodged spearpoint, every twisted joint. The fossil record doesn't show extinction as drama. It shows it as attrition, as loss of territory, loss of prey, loss of time. And humans, they kept climbing. You trace the bones from caves to cliff faces, from valleys to open plains. You see campfires growing more frequent, tool fragments appearing in deeper layers of soil. Burial sites with arranged stones, ochre dust, symbolic carvings. You don't just see life, you see memory, meaning. Because bones rot, but stories endure. And you begin to realize some of those scars weren't just results of violence. They were messages, embedded evidence meant to last beyond words. A saber's rib with a carved notch near the break, tally, or trophy. A human skull buried beside a predator's fang, ritual or warning. The dead were speaking. You just had to learn how to listen. The ground beneath you isn't silent. It hums with the echoes of survival. And in that hum, you feel a strange kind of pride. Not for conquest, but for resilience. Because every scar you uncover is proof that your ancestors refused to disappear. They weren't stronger, they weren't faster, but they endured. And sometimes, that's all history remembers, who was still standing when the dust finally settled. So now, holding that saber-toothed rib in your hands, gouged, scarred, and partially healed, you're not just holding a piece of an extinct predator. You're holding a memory of the moment when your kind stopped running. The question is, if you had been there, scarred but not broken, would you have fought back? Or would you have become just another name, lost to the dirt? You sit by the fire, hands raw from shaping stone, your body aching from the day's hunt. But the night doesn't end with food and flame. It begins again with stories. The old one speaks first, not with words like yours, but with gestures, sound, rhythm. He moves his arms like falling trees, his fingers like claws, his voice mimicking the guttural growl of a predator that once stalked these woods. He shows how they cornered it, how the trap worked, where they stood, where one of them fell. And as you watch, something stirs in you, something more than memory. This is knowledge. Not in books, not etched in stone, but alive, passed from body to body, from breath to breath. The saber-tooth is gone now, killed, wounded, or fled, but its story survives, not as a fossil, but as a lesson. And tomorrow, when it's your turn to lead the hunt, you'll remember every detail. Because intelligence isn't just what you know. It's what you carry forward. You weren't the strongest creature in the Ice Age, not even close. You couldn't outrun the horses. You couldn't outclimb the bears. You couldn't overpower the saber. But you had one weapon none of them did, the ability to learn from each other. When one of you stumbled into danger and survived, the others didn't have to repeat the mistake. When someone found that a certain stone shattered less, or that meat smoked over fire lasted longer, the whole tribe grew stronger. Mistakes weren't dead ends, they were blueprints. And that changed everything. You remember watching the child, barely old enough to walk, mimic the motions of sharpening a rock. Her tiny hands awkward, clumsy, but determined. She had never seen the first tools. She didn't have to. She was born into a world where someone had already made the leap. You didn't restart at zero. Every generation stood on the shoulders of those who endured before. And soon the tools got better. Not just harder stone, sharper angles, not just bigger spears, balanced shafts. You figured out that fire could temper the wood, that some plants numbed wounds, that water flowed faster downhill, And when someone died, you remembered how. This memory wasn't instinct. It wasn't baked into your genes. It was earned. It was taught. And that made it culture. The saber-tooth didn't have culture. It had skill, fierce, honed, inherited. But when one saber fell into a pit trap, the next saber didn't learn to avoid it. When it charged into fire and burned, its kin didn't fear flames forever. Every generation started fresh. You didn't. You remembered. And more importantly, you taught. You showed each other how to twist fibers into cord, how to spot the shimmer of flint beneath the mud, how to read the sky before the rains, and eventually, how to mark the cave walls not just with animals but with symbols, meaning. You began to build something invisible. A thread of thought that stretched from campfire to campfire, from mother to child, from death to survival. And even when you lost people, you didn't lose their wisdom. You buried it deep, inside each story. Like the tale of the one who stood against the saber alone, not because he was brave, but because the others needed time to escape. You don't know if the story is true anymore, but it lives, and it teaches. And every time you hear it, you hold your spear a little tighter. That's intelligence, that's evolution. Not just through blood and bone, but through belief and memory. And intelligence isn't just about the hunt. It's in how you divide tasks, how you assign roles, how you decide who leads. It's in the way you observe seasons, track herds, mimic birdsong to lure prey closer. It's in the quiet eyes of a mother who watches her child stack stones and then gently adjusts them. You began to see patterns and, more importantly, patterns of patterns. Not just that a predator attacks from behind, but that it does so more when the wind is strong. Not just that food spoils, but that it spoils slower near smoke. You weren't reacting anymore. You were predicting, planning, preparing. The saber never stood a chance. Not against minds like yours. Because eventually, it wasn't just knowledge that passed down, it was strategy, philosophy, the idea that you could shape the world to your needs, not just survive inside it. You began to change rivers, build shelters, track stars. And it all started with a single moment by the fire, watching the old one gesture toward the cave wall. You wonder, what happens if he hadn't shared? What if his memory died with him? Would you still be cowering in the dark? Would you even be here? And then you realize your kind's greatest weapon was never stone, never fire, never even the spear. It was the ability to sit across from one another, wounded and worn, and say, "This is what happened. This is what I learned. Now you carry it." Not for ego, but for survival. Because to survive alone is instinct. But to survive together, that's intelligence. So now, when the child beside you asks why we sharpen stone this way, or why the saber once ruled the forest, you don't just answer. Or you teach. Because your story didn't begin with strength. It began with sharing. You walk across open tundra, where bones whisper beneath your feet. The ground is softer than it was a generation ago, not with rain, but with the slow retreat of the ice. Trees stretch where once there was only wind. The herds have moved. The cold breath of the world has shifted, and something is missing. No roars in the night, no glint of fangs in the underbrush, no low rumble that once made your people grip their spears tighter and lean closer to the fire. The saber-tooth is vanishing, not with a scream, but with a silence. You don't know it yet, but you are standing at the end of a lineage millions of years old. The age of the great predators is closing, not with conquest, but with change. It didn't happen all at once. No single battle turned the tide. There was no glorious final clash between your kind and theirs. Instead, it was a long, unraveling, quiet, brutal, invisible. First came the climate. The glaciers pulled back, the forests crept forward, and the open plains where the saber reigned, where speed and surprise meant everything, began to disappear. In their place came dense trees, uneven ground, scattered prey. The saber's massive build, once perfect for ambush in the tall grass, now made it slow, clumsy, out of place. Its fangs, so deadly, so iconic, became liabilities in close forest hunts. A single bad strike could snap them. And unlike you, it couldn't repair or replace what evolution had taken eons to sculpt. Then came the prey. The great megafauna, mammoths, giant sloths, enormous bison began to dwindle. Some moved with the cold, others starved or simply failed to keep up with a world in motion. And the saber, built to take down giants, suddenly faced a menu of smaller, faster, harder to catch creatures. It had evolved for a stage that no longer existed. But you didn't rely on one strategy, one prey, one environment. You moved, you adapted, you observed, and you hunted. Not with raw power, but with numbers, with traps, with fire and patience and long memories. The saber may have been terrifying in a face-to-face ambush, but your ancestors didn't play by those rules. They studied terrain. They learned timing. They built systems, and in doing so, they became something new. A predator of predators. You didn't wipe out the saber overnight, but you outlasted it. Where it struggled to find enough to eat, you learned how to store meat. Where it searched for prey, you tracked migrations. Where it faltered in changing forests, you built new tools, new shelters, new paths. And somewhere, perhaps in a gully during a cold spring, or in a forest too dense to chase, the last saber-tooth fell. Not from a spear, but from the slow pressure of a world reshaped. It's easy to imagine a glorious final encounter. One last saber cornering one last tribe, fire and steel against fang and claw. But the truth is quieter, and in many ways more profound. They faded, and you remained. But survival came with a weight. The forest was quieter now, yes, but also emptier. You no longer heard the cries that once echoed across the night. You no longer felt that cold breath of primal terror before sleep. Something ancient had passed, and you had watched it go. Did you know what it meant? Did you wonder what would follow? Because something else had shifted, not just in the forests and prey herds, but in you. The saber-tooth had ruled by instinct. You survived by learning, and now you began to reflect. You looked at bones differently. You studied footprints not just to chase, but to understand. You felt sorrow for a fallen predator, not fear, respect, perhaps even awe. Because deep down you knew, you didn't just win. You inherited. You inherited the earth the saber once ruled. And now, its disappearance left a question hanging in the trees. What kind of apex predator would you become? The saber hadn't meant to fall. It simply couldn't adapt fast enough. And for all your intelligence, your fire, your community, that same danger waited for you too. A world that changed faster than you could respond. A crisis you couldn't outthink in time. But you had something the saber never did. Memory. And memory became prophecy. You remembered what happens to those who do not change. You remembered what happens when the land shifts and the hunters do not. You remembered the silence that followed the roar. And so, even as the saber's bones sank into the soil, you carved its image on cave walls. You painted its curved fangs, its great body crouched in the grass. You passed down the stories, the warnings, the wonder. Not just to honor the past, but to remind the future. Because the saber-tooth was never just your enemy. It was your test. And now, with it gone, the test falls to you. Will you learn from the vanished? Or one day vanish yourself? The era of the saber was over. But the age of humans your age had only just begun. And already the earth was watching. You sit at the edge of a quiet fire, the embers soft and warm against the cold night. There's no threat rustling in the dark brush, no amber eyes watching from the tree line, no curved fangs waiting to strike. But in the silence, something ancient still lingers, not fear, not danger, but a memory. You remember them. You remember the ones who stalked you through grass taller than your head, the ones who crouched low and waited for the perfect moment, who moved with silence so complete it felt like the earth itself had paused. The saber-toothed tigers, Smilodon, apex predators of their time and teachers you never asked for. They were never just beasts, they were trials, living obstacles wrapped in muscle and instinct. And every time you crossed paths, you were faced with the same question. Are you built to survive? Because the saber didn't just hunt you, it shaped you. It made you faster, even if your legs couldn't outrun it. Sharper, even when you carried no claws. Wiser, even when you didn't understand what wisdom was yet. The truth is, your earliest victories weren't about killing the saber. They were about not being killed, about waking up the day after a close escape, about reading the signs in crushed grass and learning that danger leaves footprints, about finding shelter not by chance but by pattern. You started to think, not just in the moment, but ahead. And that changed everything. In the presence of the saber, instinct wasn't enough. So you adapted, you organized, you watched, you waited. You began to understand not just how things happened, but why. Where the saber was shaped by evolution, you shaped evolution back. You broke the script. You began using tools not just to strike, but to create. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was territory. A declaration to the wild, this space is mine. Spears were no longer weapons. They were messages, warnings carved into wood, extensions of your intent. But even more powerful than any spear was the moment you began to share what you learned. The saber taught you that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about memory, a lesson held in a scar, a tactic whispered from elder to youth, a symbol painted on a cave wall. The saber was the test, but teaching each other became the answer. They forced you to become social, to protect the young, to bury the dead, because the stakes weren't abstract. One mistake and an entire bloodline ended. So you formed tribes, you planned hunts, you watched the sky and learned seasons, you split roles and gathered knowledge. You didn't just survive, you began to build survival as a system. All because of a predator you couldn't outfight. You had to outthink it instead. And that lesson, that shift from brute strength to mental agility, never left you. In fact, it's still here. Every time you hesitate before walking into the dark, you echo those first nights when the saber might have been waiting. Every time you teach a child to look both ways, you are passing down the same warning. Danger comes without sound. But there's more to this story than fear. The saber taught you respect. Respect for the wild. Respect for your own limits. Respect for life itself. Because you came close enough to losing it that you had to start valuing it more than ever. And when you finally stood over its fallen body, not as prey, but as predator, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like crossing a threshold. The wild would never be the same. You would never be the same. They didn't just force you to evolve physically. They made you think in terms of generations. Your survival wasn't just about you anymore. It became about who came next, what they would inherit, what they would remember. And that's the secret of humanity's rise. We don't just pass on our genes. We pass on our stories. The saber became more than a danger. It became a myth, a memory, a symbol of a time when the world was ruled not by cities or satellites, but by fangs and silence. And you carry that symbol still in your fears, in your instincts, in your need to protect those around you. So now, as you look back, what did the saber truly leave behind? It left behind you. It left behind a creature who learned how to see through danger, how to bend chaos into opportunity, how to survive by changing, by adapting, by dreaming. You were not born to dominate. You were forced to innovate. You were not chosen to inherit the earth. You fought to earn it. The Saber-Toothed didn't lose because it was weaker. It lost because it was finished, perfected for a world that didn't last. But you were never finished. You were messy, unstable, incomplete. And that incompleteness was your gift. Because incomplete things can grow. So here's the final lesson the saber gave you. Survival isn't about winning. It's about changing. The world will shift. The predators will change. The rules will rewrite themselves over and over. But the creature who can adapt, who can remember, share, and transform, that creature will last. That's what the saber taught you. That's what it cost the saber to teach. So tonight, as the fire glows and no threat crouches in the dark, you sit not in safety, but in legacy. You are the echo of ancient fears. You are the answer to ancient challenges. And you are the question the next age must face. If you were shaped by the saber-tooth, then what or who will shape you next? You don't feel the echo in your bones, not consciously, but it's there. In the way your heart races when something moves in the dark, in the flicker of instinct that tells you when someone's watching, in the way a parent's body shifts subtly, protectively, when danger approaches. You may live behind doors now, sleep under roofs, walk through cities lit like permanent daytime, but deep beneath it all, you still carry the memory of something that hunted you long before you built walls. The saber-tooth is long gone. Its fangs lie buried beneath sediment and time. But the game it forced you to play, the cold calculus of predator and prey, never ended. And you didn't just survive it. You evolved because of it. Before there was language, there were looks, silent gestures in the grass, a glance that meant danger, a grip on the arm that meant run. The saber taught you to read each other not for warmth but for survival. And in that crucible of fear, your brain grew sharper. Not in size, in connection. Because no single person could face that beast alone. It took groups, shared attention, shared planning, shared memory. And slowly, survival stopped being a solo pursuit and started becoming culture. You built stories out of hunts, mapped seasons through scars, passed on knowledge not with instinct but with intention. And every time you remembered, every time you warned the next generation, you planted a seed of something bigger than fear. Intelligence, but not the kind measured by numbers. The kind that looks at a claw mark and sees not just a predator, but a pattern. The kind that watches how a saber hunts and turns it into a trap. The kind that links moments across years and lives and asks, what does this mean for tomorrow? That's what the saber taught you. And it wasn't just your brain that changed. Your society did. You organized in tighter groups, shared duties, raised young together. Because when predators lurk in every bush, vulnerability becomes strength if you choose to face it together. The saber didn't know it, but with every ambush, it sharpened your empathy. Your ability to feel fear and still act for someone else. And that empathy laid the first bricks of everything that would come. Families, tribes, rituals, mourning. The first time you buried someone, it wasn't just grief, it was a signal. This person mattered. Their knowledge, their presence, their role. Death wasn't just a loss, it was a threat to the group. And memory became a survival tool. What do we remember? What do we pass on? What should never be forgotten? You learn that too, not from safety, but from danger. Because every forgotten lesson cost lives. So your mind began to stretch. Not just across distance, but across time. You planned seasons ahead. You stored food. You watched the stars. You began to think like something no animal had ever been before. A future being. You didn't just respond to danger. You anticipated it. You didn't just react. You remembered. And so, in the pressure of survival, you carved out something rare. Consciousness with continuity. The ability not just to live, but to understand you are alive and why. And isn't that what defines you now? That spark of reflection, that instinct to connect past with future, that quiet fire inside that asks questions even when no answers are promised. Where did it come from? Some of it came from love, some from curiosity, but a great deal of it, the discipline, the urgency, the planning, came from fear, from a world where being careless could end your bloodline, from a time when the earth was not yours, when you weren't the apex predator, when you had to earn every breath. The saber-tooth was not just a beast in the shadows. It was an evolutionary sculptor. Every clawed footstep pressed something deeper into your ancestors' minds. Awareness, calculation, empathy, foresight. Because against a creature stronger than you, there was only one way to survive. Become something more than yourself. So yes, you carry the saber's legacy, not in your fangs, not in your speed, but in how you think, in how you teach, in how you worry about your children when they step too close to the unknown. The saber is gone, but you are not. And the way you live is still shaped by that ancient contest. Your bedtime stories, their cautionary maps. Your myths, they encode survival strategies. Your moral compass, it began when humans had to decide, do we abandon the weak or protect them? Your deepest virtues, courage, sacrifice, leadership, all had meaning because danger once defined life, and the greatest danger wore a crown of curved ivory blades. So the saber is not forgotten. Not really. You carry its memory in your nervous system, in the adrenaline that spikes when you hear a snap in the forest, in the unexplainable unease you feel when eyes stare at you from the dark, in the fire you build at night even when you know there's nothing out there, just in case. It's not irrational. It's ancestral. And even now, in a world of satellites, cities, and information, the saber still teaches. It teaches you that survival is not comfort. It is not dominance. It is not control. Survival is change, adaptation, humility. The saber failed to change, and so it disappeared. But you learn to evolve, to question, to remember, and because of that you remain. So when you ask who you really are, don't just look at what you've built. Look at what you've endured. Because your mind, this impossible, brilliant, unpredictable thing, was born not from safety, but from pressure. And the predator that helped shape it still roams inside you. Not as a threat, but as a lesson. So the next time you doubt your strength, remember this. You are the outcome of a war you didn't choose, but you won it anyway. You step into a forest, not to survive, but to observe. The trees are quiet, the air damp with the breath of something unseen. A rustle in the underbrush reminds you, you're not alone. And for a moment, you feel it again, that ancient sensation, that flicker of tension that once ruled your ancestors every waking moment. But now, you're not running, you're watching. And what you see out here looks strangely familiar. A wolf prowling through alpine snow, testing the wind with its nose. A herd of elk stiffening in the distance, listening. They don't speak, but the message passes anyway, move now. The game hasn't changed. Only the players. Predator and prey still write their stories into the ground every day, etching survival into muscle and memory. But this time, you're the outsider, No longer the hunted, maybe not even the hunter. You're something more complicated. The witness, the disruptor, the one who changed the rules. Because the predator-prey balance that once shaped you now bends beneath your influence. And it shows. The saber-tooth disappeared, but other apex hunters linger. Lions, orcas, bears, crocodiles. Not as enemies now, but as symbols of wild systems that once governed the earth. Systems that now face pressures your ancestors could never have imagined. Not from predators, but from you. You didn't mean to break the chain, but fire led to farms, and farms led to fences. And slowly, the wilderness began to shrink. And in its place grew something strange. Safety, yes, but also a forgetting. You forgot what it meant to be part of that chain, to feel both fear and awe at the sight of a predator, to learn from the wild instead of trying to conquer it. And in that forgetting, something fragile began to slip. Because predators don't just cull the weak, they shape the strong. They maintain ecosystems, not with mercy, but with balance. A wolf's hunt can alter the path of rivers. A shark's presence can reshape an entire reef. And when you remove them, things fall apart in ways you never expected. Too many deer strip the forest bare. Coral reefs collapse under unchecked prey. Diseases spread faster when predators no longer limit the sick and the weak. The balance tilts, and everything begins to echo out of sync. So now, in this modern age, you face a strange new paradox. You no longer fear the predator, but you desperately need it. Not just to control populations, but to remind you of your place. Because somewhere deep down, you were never meant to dominate the earth alone. You were meant to be part of something vast, breathing, dynamic, something that challenged you, sharpened you, taught you. And that teaching is still happening. Today, scientists study lion hunts to understand coordination. Engineers examine eagle vision to build better drones. Ecologists look at wolves to repair ecosystems. Every lesson is a mirror, not of how far you've come, but how deeply connected you still are. Even your culture can't let go. Predators haunt your myths, your metaphors, your dreams. You call ruthless people sharks. You say someone, top of the food chain. You design your superheroes with fangs, claws, stealth. It's all still there, the ancient memory, alive in the stories you tell about strength, risk, and survival. But maybe now, it's time for a different story. Not one where humans defeat nature, but one where you rejoin it. Where the lessons your ancestors learned under the eyes of sabers, caution, respect, adaptability, become the tools of your future. What if every conservation effort was not just charity, but memory? A way to preserve not just species, but the dynamics that shaped your own rise. You don't need to return to caves to honor the past. But maybe, just maybe, you need to remember that you were forged in a world where power was never permanent, and survival never came without cost. So next time you hear a wolf howl, or see footage of a jaguar moving through shadows, don't look away. Watch closely. Because what they do, how they stalk, how they chase, how they teach their young to fear and to thrive, it's not just instinct. its heritage, and part of it is yours. You are not separate from this world. You are not above it. You are of it, born from a lineage that only exists because you listened, learned, and respected the wild forces around you. The saber-tooth is gone, but the world it ruled, the lessons it carved into your lineage, still waits in the forest, the tundra, the savanna, waiting for you to look, to learn, to remember. So ask yourself this: would you know how to live if you weren't in charge? And maybe, more importantly, would you know how to listen if the earth spoke back? You close your eyes and imagine a flickering cave wall, shadows dancing in the firelight. The rough outlines of a great beast emerge, frozen in eternal chase. A saber-toothed tiger, teeth like curved daggers, muscles rippling with silent power. This image is not just art. It's a story, a memory, a warning. It's the echo of your ancestors, fears and fascinations, etched in pigment and stone, carried across millennia. You might think the saber-tooth vanished millions of years ago, lost to time and ice, but its shadow never left you. It lingered in your myths, whispered in your legends, and found new life in your culture's darkest corners. Why? Because the saber-tooth was more than a predator. It was a symbol of death, danger, and the unknown. A creature that forced you to look beyond your own skin and face the wild's relentless threat. From the ancient engravings on cave walls to the towering statues and carvings scattered across forgotten civilizations, the saber-tooth prowled your collective imagination long after it disappeared from the earth. You see it in stories told around fires, where fear and respect entwined, where the saber-tooth was both the villain and the teacher. Its image was a constant reminder that life is fragile, that strength is fleeting, and that the wild can never be fully tamed. As you trace the saber's path through history, you realize how it became a mirror for human fears, the unknown lurking just beyond the campfire's glow, the silent stalker waiting in shadowed forests. It was the perfect metaphor for the dangers that shaped you. But it also took on new meanings. In some cultures, the saber-tooth was revered, even worshipped, a spirit guide or a guardian of the hunt. Its fangs became talismans, believed to hold power, protection, and a connection to the primal forces of nature. You sense that this reverence was born from the same respect that your ancestors had for the animals they faced. A blend of fear and admiration that blurred the lines between predator and protector. And as time marched forward, the saber-tooth's image evolved. In modern times, it appears in books, films, and art, not just as a relic of the past, but as an icon of raw power and mystery. Its exaggerated fangs and fierce visage capture your imagination, reminding you of a world where survival was uncertain, where every shadow might hide a threat. But why do you still feel drawn to it? Perhaps because the saber-tooth represents something inside you, the wildness, the instinct, the constant tension between vulnerability and strength. It challenges you to remember your origins, the battles fought not just with teeth and claws, but with courage, wit, and community. It asks you to look at your own fears and face them. Because myth, is not just about fantasy. It is memory disguised as story. And in remembering the saber-tooth, you remember what it means to be human. To live in a world where danger and hope exist side by side. Where survival is never guaranteed, but always worth fighting for. So when you encounter the image of the saber-tooth, whether in a museum, a book, or your own mind, pause. Feel the weight of its legacy. Because within that terrifying smile lies the story of your ancestors' greatest triumphs and deepest fears. And through it, a part of you still roars. You stand at the crossroads of time, feeling the weight of countless generations beneath your feet. The world around you is unrecognizable, no longer the frozen tundras or dense forests where shadows of saber-toothed tigers once loomed. Yet, the echoes of that ancient struggle still reverberate inside you, woven into your very being. You think back to those fragile cavemen, your ancestors, smaller, weaker, and vulnerable in a landscape ruled by predators that could crush bones with a single bite. They didn't survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because they were clever, because they learned to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. You inherit a legacy of ingenuity, the spark that turned stone into tools, fire into protection, and curiosity into culture. Every invention, every new idea is a tribute to the fight against fear. Your ancestors didn't just endure, they adapted, innovated, and created. You see this in the sharpened spearheads that outmatched even the fiercest claws, in the communal strategies that transformed hunting from desperation into mastery. You realize that survival was never a solo act. It was a symphony of collaboration, teaching, and relentless problem-solving. The saber-toothed tiger, with all its power, represented a force of nature, raw, untamed, and terrifying. But you, the human, became something else. You became the architect of your own fate. You turned instincts into intellect and threats into challenges to overcome. This transformation was not sudden. It was slow, deliberate, and often uncertain. Your ancestors stumbled, failed, and faced extinction more than once, yet they never gave up. They watched, listened, and learned. Every scar, every loss was a lesson carved into the story of survival. Now, as you look out at the world shaped by millions of years of that struggle, you understand your place within it. You are both the product and the author of this narrative, a species that emerged from the edge of oblivion through sheer ingenuity. And yet the shadow of the saber-tooth remains. It reminds you that power is not permanent, that the wild still holds mysteries you cannot control. It whispers caution, humility, and respect. You have tamed fire, built cities, and decoded genomes. But the primal dance between predator and prey still pulses beneath the surface. It lives in your fears and your dreams, your myths and your science. Your journey from vulnerable caveman to dominant species is a story of overcoming fear, weakness, and the unknown with the light of intellect and community. It's a story that challenges you to remember where you came from, not to glorify the past, but to honor it, to carry forward the lessons learned in the face of death and danger. Because your ingenuity is more than just survival. It's hope, it's possibility, It's the fire that refuses to go out. So ask yourself, how will you shape the future? Will you carry the lessons of the saber-tooth, the respect for balance, the embrace of challenge, into the world you build next? Or will you forget, losing yourself in the illusion of control? The choice is yours. But one thing is certain. The story of human ingenuity is far from over. And it all began with the courage to face a world ruled by sabers and to rise.